But looking at Chelsea Football Club, a report this morning, they're no closer to agreeing a new deal with Declan Rice, with Liverpool circling for the player. But there's talk of a £80 million price tag. On this deal, what do you think is going to happen? Will he sign this new deal? And do you think if he is to leave, Liverpool will pay the asking price that Chelsea are demanding, or will they get him for cheaper than the headlines suggest?
That's a Mount question, right? Because you said Declan Rice.
Yeah. Sorry, Mason Mount. Sorry, my apologies. Mason Mount. Sorry.
So Mason Mount, and I'm sure we'll talk about Declan Rice as well, is in a position where Chelsea have to come back and pitch to him, either towards the end of the season or at the end of the season. It was supposed to be at the end of the season, but Mount's out now with a pelvic injury, and there is a chance that he won't therefore play for Chelsea again if he leaves the club. He might be fit for the final game of the season against Newcastle United at Stamford Bridge, but we have to wait and see. So Chelsea might move a bit earlier now because Mount's sidelined. He's not having to focus on football. But come the end of the season, for sure, Chelsea are going to try again. And even though earlier on in negotiations, the parties were far apart, Mount is Chelsea through and through. He's been there since the age of 6. So when people have said previously that Chelsea have somehow agreed to sell Mount, simply not true. Chelsea want to keep hold of Mount. Todd Boehly, Behrad Agbali have told Mount categorically and repeatedly that they want him to stay at the football club. And Chelsea and Mount decided they would pick this up during the summer because they were far apart. And they're far apart in many ways because during the negotiations which dragged on, Chelsea's structure and approach towards renewals changed. So if Mount had been able to sign something when Reece James did, he might have avoided a Champions League decrease and got slightly different terms. But since January, every single Chelsea signature has to buy into the new incentive-driven offer whereby your wage can go up and down depending on individual or team success, and it includes a Champions League decrease. So Mount, obviously, if he stays at Chelsea, is still going to get a big pay rise, but yet to be agreed between Mount and Chelsea, exact terms that suit all parties. And Chelsea want longer term contracts, they want lower base wages, and Mount feels that the overall reward that he's owed should be higher, but also that the length of contract should be different as well. So there's a few points to discuss, but there is a willingness on all sides to at least sit around the table, which means that Mount actually hasn't made up his mind at this point. And Mauricio Pochettino, if as expected, he comes in the next few days. He won't start until next season, but appointed, signing within the next kind of few days. That's a factor too, because once Mount appreciates the outgoings, which from his perspective, if he stays, means that he'll see more game time if there's not as many people fighting for the same position. And then if the manager also wants to keep him, which is true to my understanding, that Pochettino has said to Chelsea, it's really important we do everything in our power to keep Mount, that might be a factor as well. So Mount staying at Chelsea is all about giving him that pathway and also the new manager getting the best out of him. Because this season, I think he's only scored 3 Premier League goals off the top of my head. Last season, he scored 11 and had basically the best season of his career. And if Mount turns into the player that he was last season rather than this season and plays regularly and is happy with his football and is settled within the squad, then obviously Chelsea have got a fantastic player, which is why they don't want to lose him. So it's not a given that Mason Mount will leave. And then on the flip side, with Liverpool and Arsenal have taken a look, there's an opportunity because of the contractual situation to get Mount at a bargain. And Liverpool in particular have this genuine interest and have been pushing because they know that Chelsea, if Mount simply says no, will sell this summer rather than do that Levy-like move of just keeping hold of the player for an extra year, because Chelsea know that they then need the Mount fee. And that's where there's an opportunity. And right now it's quite hard to judge because Chelsea have waited. So they've not shown their hand. So of course the suitors have an opportunity to pitch now and try and agree something before Chelsea come in. And then whatever they pitch will be used as leverage to go back to Chelsea. So that's all very normal. But we're only really seeing the suitor side at this point. So we have to wait and see how Chelsea almost counter, and then Mount will make up his mind. So I wouldn't prejudge this one. I definitely don't think it's guaranteed that Mount stays at Chelsea, but nothing is agreed with Liverpool or anybody else at this point. And Chelsea will try for sure. And Pochettino may be a factor in that. And then with the 80 million, the suitors are adamant that they don't think it will be that high. And you may note that about 3 weeks ago, it was 70 million. So it keeps going up and up and up and up and up. And I think if you're Liverpool, you're looking more about 50 to 60. It will depend on structure as well. Perhaps the number will be higher, but the structure will be bumped up by add-ons that are either not as attainable or just worth paying if the success comes that triggers those add-ons. So don't only think about the number, think about the structure as well. But, you know, the key point in all of this is Mount hasn't decided. So anybody saying Mount's definitely going, Mount's agreed something, Mount's definitely staying, anybody kind of talking in those terms must be a psychic, because Mason Mount himself has not yet decided what his next move is.
That makes a lot of sense to us. We know there's going to be a lot of activity at Chelsea this summer. Two players that are again linked with them. One, as kind of the player has played down leaving Barca in the last few days, but it's Rafinha. There's a lot of news both from Spain and from the UK that Barca are going to sell him for around 70 million. Chelsea linked, Newcastle linked. You also got Neymar as well, who is supposedly wanting the Premier League now. But on those two players and their likelihood of joining Chelsea, maybe Newcastle as well, what's your latest understanding on both of them?
Dealing with Barcelona is going to be even harder than last summer. And we know that last summer there was smokes and mirrors, and there's no singular Barcelona player incoming that they want or outgoing that isn't linked to another. Everything is a domino effect. If they move in the direction of Messi and satisfy La Liga, then in likelihood, somebody like Rafinha could well be sold. And similarly, if they miss out on a target, they may keep hold of a player. And you may remember last summer that we had that situation where Barcelona were activating levers and they were saying that they wanted to keep hold of certain players. And then suddenly those players went. Aubameyang's a good example. Xavi said he wanted to keep the player, but there were other moving parts. And with De Jong, it was the other way around. There was a very real chance throughout large parts of the summer that the fee would be needed from De Jong. And then Barcelona made things work. And suddenly De Jong stayed, which was always what the player wanted. And this will be exactly the same with Rafinha. So don't look at a Rafinha transfer as only Rafinha. Look at a Rafinha transfer as the Barcelona circus. And that means that anyone wanting Rafinha has to work out what else Barcelona are doing and how they can stop any possible transfer for Rafinha dragging out and turning into a saga. And unfortunately, perhaps not with the same degree of full-on stubbornness, but unfortunately, Rafinha is a bit like De Jong. He wants to stay at Barcelona. He wants to fight for his place in the team. But once again, Barcelona may need that fee. So there is a real possibility here that we see Rafinha back in the Premier League. And as you say, Newcastle is one possible destination. I feel like that particular link has been overfueled and turned into something that doesn't have as much substance. And the reason for that is because Newcastle effectively want a creative-minded type player, which is why they've looked at Jack Harrison in the past, which is why they're still looking at Maddison. But I'm not aware of anything concrete between Newcastle and Rafinha. I'm not aware of any approach. And the reason why I say that is because when Rafinha was at Leeds, prior to the Barcelona move, prior to Arsenal's interest, prior to Chelsea's offer, Newcastle were asking about Rafinha, and Rafinha wasn't remotely interested. Now, I know Newcastle are in a different position at the moment, but I think we can link a club like Newcastle because of the type of position they're looking for. But I don't think there's really anything in Newcastle Rafinha at this point. And I think if Newcastle move for a creative-minded type player, it will be more the profile of a James Maddison than Rafinha. Because again, I'm not sure that Rafinha has any interest in Newcastle. Chelsea's a bit different because with Chelsea, when Rafinha went to Barcelona, his dream club, there was appeal in the Chelsea offer. But Chelsea's priority is not going to be for a player like Rafinha, not unless they get rid of Ziyech and Pulisic quickly. and maybe one more. Chelsea need a traditional striker, a goal scorer. They need a central midfielder, and possibly they need a number one goalkeeper. So Rafinha is not going to be the priority. And the last thing that Chelsea want to do, even though they need goals, is keep buying players in that same versatile position that can switch sides and can add assists and can score goals, because they got hundreds of them. And again, I point out outgoings first. Maybe there's space in the squad, but not for this kind of fee. Chelsea are not going to be able to spend 300-400 million without Champions League football. So if they want a traditional striker, even with money coming in from outgoings, that's going to be their big outlay. If they want a central midfielder, whether it's Caicedo, Lavia, Rice, again, quite a big outlay. Like, even pessimistically, that's at least 50 million. You want a goalkeeper, somebody like Onana, David Raya, Jordan Pickford. They're again all at least, and I'm saying pessimistic numbers, 30 million quid. So 30 million quid for a goalkeeper, 50 million quid for a central midfielder, 70 million quid for a traditional number 9. And those are all quite pessimistic numbers for the kind of players Chelsea are being linked with. Once again, that is their summer spend. So Rafinha to Chelsea, Rafinha to Newcastle. Maybe there's admiration from the clubs, but I would be very surprised if he ends up at either.